This conversation about your dissertation, it's important to get this because you're suggesting that you were able to uncover information that changed the trajectory of an entire country because you talked about the narrative from a different perspective. Tell us about the dissertation and that information that has impacted Namibia.
Welcome to Profound Conversations, a dynamic broadcast platform focused on building healthy communities. In an ever-evolving world, new ideas and transformative ways of being are the lights at the end of the tunnel.
This is Dr. Mawata Sankara, and this is Profound Conversations. And we're continuing a conversation with Dr. Lamont Slater. This conversation about your dissertation, it's important to get this because you're suggesting that you were able to uncover information that changed the trajectory of an entire country because you talked about the narrative from a different perspective. Tell us about the dissertation and that information that has impacted Namibia.
Yes. Yes. So again, thank you for having me. I'm glad to share this important work. This is work that from an early age, I just was really enlightened about. I didn't know about the work, and then once I knew, I was just like, we have so much to go in this work, and even today, there's not a lot of scholarship in Namibian genocide, and so I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity. For my dissertation, one of the things that it focuses on is memorialization and what I call the intercultural aspect of bringing like a holistic version of looking at this event. Again, like prior, in the past, it was called Nama Herero genocide, but after being on the ground and really digging into the archives, in which, by the way, Germany has a reputation of destroying a lot of, when they leave, destroying a lot of the archival information. But I was able to really, get into like some good archival work. And, one of the pieces of our dissertation program, which is not unique to a PhD work, but some PhD programs have it and some don't, is the requirement to have a language component of the PhD work. And I understand why, because like when I was in the archives in Namibia, all of the information was in German. And so like to really like dig into that and read like firsthand accounts of like what transpired was very powerful. With the event itself and with my work, one of the things that it really uncovers is that it really like dispels the fact that this was just like like between two tribes, Nama and Herero, and that the Germans, in their quest for what was called Lebensraum, or extra living space, was pushing the Namibians out. And it's just not a monolithic way of looking at it. My work kind of looks at it from different perspectives. Like when you talk about genocide, and I do a lot of comparative genocide as well, comparative work, is that you'll see a lot of things in common between Namibian genocide and for example, like Rwandan genocide. For example, in Namibian genocide, you had the role of religion, right? So the role of the church in both instances. In the case of Namibia, you had the mission, the Rhenish mission, which was in the south of Namibia. Then you had the Finnish mission, which was in north of Namibia. And let's just take the Finnish mission, for example. Part of like genocide, it doesn't happen just a spark and it happens. It's a process that happens that leads to genocide. Like for example, in the case of Namibia, the setup was the missionaries. So they sent, these countries have sent missions to the area to kind of like cultivate the area. And that starts the process of like, when we talk about genocide, it's not always massive killing. As you know, like there's different versions of what is a genocide. So the genocide, like under Article 2 of the UN Convention Center, is that yes, number one is like killing of a specific group, in whole or in part. So even like when you look at like the African American experience, I mean, some people will say I was at a conference one time, and argue that our experience was a genocide. Many
Hmm.
people will argue that it wasn't, but it's in whole or in part, and so that the case could be made there. And then it's also causing serious bodily harm, imposing measures that will restrict births within the group, like sterilization. And so there's other facets within the role of genocide, including a cultural genocide, which occurred in Namibia as well. But when you have the mission work, then after the mission, then they send the military in, and then the military is working with the religious groups, right? Same thing happened with Rwanda and Namibia. And then the final piece is the state coming down and ordering, in the case of Namibia, a execution order to pretty much wipe out what they called the Herero. Now, one of the things that I learned from actually being in Namibia and talking to locals and local historians and family members whose family was a part of the genocide is that Herero and Damara were both loose terms for Black people.
Hmm.
So when somebody said Herero, that meant Black. It didn't mean a specific group. That's what they thought of it as, but the term Herero to the Germans when they came upon a group of, especially the dark-skinned Black people, they called everybody Herero, not knowing that it was segmented, that you had Damara, that you had Oshivambo, that you had different groups. But in categorizing everybody as Herero, they misrepresented the event itself. And so my work kind of like reaffirms everybody's position within the genocide and talks about like moving forward, because the genocide just doesn't happen in a vacuum. And like when it happens, the residual just doesn't stay there. Like even in today's, I'll close out with this. Even in today's space, there was a group that was not real. Well, I mean, some were able to like get through what was called the red line, but in Namibia, there was a up in the north. There was what the Germans have put a red line pretty much right across the country and told the Ovambo tribe not to cross that line, even though some were able to do it through work, and they were also a part of the genocide as well. But for the most part, this large group were not executed in the same way for the most part. And as a result, in today's time, that group, the Oshivambo, it has been the group that has been in power since independence. And so the other groups like Herero, Nama, San people have all been like disenfranchised groups. And so this is how you can see like genocide playing out through the politics as well. In that group, the Ovambo group, the Herero Nama has been trying to get reparations from Germany for a long time, and has just recently got some reparations, but it all because they all go through the Ovambo government, well, SWAPO government that has predominantly Ovambo folks running the government. The reparations that were supposed to go to Herero Nama didn't make it there. So I'll close with that. So then there's a politics of genocide too. So remember I talked about like how there's other people that's involved with the genocide. Well, because Herero and Nama were the ones that were predominantly known for being parts of the genocide. Now those groups are kind of like trying to say Damara wasn't a part of it, but they were. They are also entitled for reparations. So
Hmm.
that goes into the politics of genocide as it plays out in the current time.
So you're suggesting that in 1884 there was the Germans were over this particular space called Namibia. You talked about the Council of Berlin, where they partitioned the continent of Africa the way they did for the purpose of their own purpose. And so, of course, you know that Germany put the conference in Berlin because they saw that they were losing out anyway. And so they
Mhm.
said, the only way we can get some land is by making people come over to our space and have this meeting. And by default, people say, "Oh, sure, we give you some land," but in reality, other people had already beat them to the punch. So we have the Council of Berlin, and then you have the population who suggests that they are not going to take this sitting down. They took a stance, and so you have the rebellion where the Herero and the Nama and others were beginning to take a stand. And when they took a stance, is when we see this issue of death coming their way, where they were hung, shot, flogged, they were castrated, they were all other ways maimed for the purpose of the Germans having their way. It was justified by utilizing the conversation of eugenics and saying that this population is inferior, but it really was an issue of oppression and dynamics of human denigration. This is powerful. And your work, your dissertation, has influenced how that particular narrative is told today. Share with us about how your work has changed the narrative where they would say certain things as a person lived and died here to saying, no, this is who lived and died here and why it's so important to memorialize these places.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I mean, so, and it's important to the people of that community as well. I mean, because if you think about it, like when you see memorials that are created by the colonists, like in Namibia, like for example, you have different areas in Namibia. You have Swakopmund, you
Mm,
have Lüderitz, and
mm,
you had different concentration camps put up all around Namibia, which again preceded the Holocaust. So when we
mm.
think about the Holocaust and concentration camps in the Holocaust, we don't realize that before the Holocaust, Germans established concentration camps in Namibia. Before Namibia, in the Boer War, they had established concentration camps. That the reason why it's called concentration camp in the first place is because during the war between the British and the Dutch, the so-called Boers, one of the techniques that they use is they took the women and children and put them in a camp, and they threatened to kill these people, in the camp and try to use that as leverage. And so that's the origin of these camps. But getting back to the work, with regards to the work, it's it means a lot to be represented in the right way. There's street names that were when I lived there. So I lived there for 5 years, and there was street names named after Lothar von uh, uh, I can't get the name right now,
Otto
but
von,
named after the person that
Lothar von
uh,
Trotha.
Von Trotha, thank you. Von,
Mhm.
von Trotha. Named after Von Trotha, that was the person that ordered the extermination order. So you had street names after him. You had street names after Carl Dove, which Carl Dove was also instrumental in the Namibian genocide and really encouraged the German army to. I think there's a famous quote with Carl Dove, and what Carl Dove says, he says something to the effect. I'm paraphrasing, but and there's a street named Carl Dove as well. It's a main
Mm.
thoroughfare, and he says that leniency to the natives, um, leniency to the natives is like oppression to the white man, something like that.
Wow.
And so that type of rhetoric kind of like sparked up like the need to really, in the German mind, annihilate a whole
Mm,
group
mm,
of
mm.
people,
Wow.
and that street is still in existence. This is the issue. So part of like why I really get into the work is that once people know, there's power in knowing. So once people actually know what they see, you start to see the momentum. You start to see people engaged. You start to see people react to it. Like in Swakopmund, there's a large statue of what they call a fallen soldier, and this represents um, German soldiers that died during the attacks between the Namibians um, and the Germans. So these are memorialized all over Germany, and like this big statue the locals threw some paint on it, just to let people know that like this is not what we're about. This is very discouraging to have this statue here in the middle of Swakopmund. And I'll end with this too: is that we also have to put the church. Um, we have to like call the church to task as well. In Namibia, they have a church right in the middle of Windhoek called Christus Kerke, Christ Church, and inside the church they have a lot of memorials inside the church that represent fallen Germans that's on plaques inside of the church. And there's another section of the church that has like a door with bars on it. And you have to ask the person, the keeper of the church, to, because they know me, because I taught down there. I used to bring my students behind this. It was like bars. It's like a door with bars on it. They don't want nobody to go in there. But once you open that door, there's a picture of captive um, Herero, Nama, Oshivambo on the wall. And those people were the ones who built the church. And the people that built the church, there was a concentration camp in the background. So there's a picture of the concentration camp in the background. So I used to go from the concentration camp to the church, and they built that church. And there's a picture of that inside of the church, but it's behind a door that is locked, so they don't want the public to see it. And so it's like things like that we champion for, that makes me feel good that the work that we're doing, like I said, it's just not myself. There's other people that are championing this work, to expose it for what it is and to educate the public. And I think it's working. I mean, I've been able to talk about Namibian genocide for quite a while now. I've been invited all over the world to speak about it and really introduce it within mainstream curriculum. So I feel good about the work.
I'm grateful that you talk about this, and we are familiar with the Rwandan genocide, but we're not familiar with this one as so much. I mean, we don't hear about it, and in part we don't hear about it because the people who tell the story from their perspective, and so you told us about how they put the memorial images, the fallen soldiers, but not who fell among those who fought against their existence being there, against the Germans being there. You mentioned the Boers, so I'm assuming that you talk about South African conversation as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to make sure that we're clear about the Boers and the Voortrekkers in that region. Now we have the beginning of concentration camp, which was a seasoning process of breaking down the psychology of a population to traumatize them and terrorize them to not resist the oppressor. And so this story, and you told us also about Herero and Nama, just really meaning people who are African and are Black, but these people built this institution, built the church, and yet they are ostracized or put back in this corner. But you are suggesting that you're bringing them back to the front. In so doing, what do you hope to happen within the minds and psyches of populations of people that see this? What do you desire? What is your greatest desire for people to, once we know this, what do you want us to do about it?
Yeah, so I think that once people know about like these atrocities, it's just like, how can you get involved to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And how can we learn from countries that were able to move forward? And I always like point to like, this is not a one size fit all, but in the case of Burundi and Rwanda, after both of those atrocities, one of the ways that they were able to move on, in the case of Rwanda specifically, is that they were able to memorialize, to create memorials that really educated the public to not ever let this happen again. Like, for example, they have a church where they have a coffin with like a stake running through, like a person like in the coffin. And what it represents like the type of torture that happened specifically towards women in that, in Rwanda. And they want you to know about it. They're not covering up what happened in that situation. And they also want you to know that there is a way forward. There were I believe it was 44 Tutsi that were given a death sentence in 1997, I believe. And so there were people that took some accountability, not as much as they should have, but people moved forward with some accountability, and they were able to set up the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, which allowed people to really come to terms of what happened and move forward. And so for me, I mean, one of the things that I try to do is make sure that these stories are told, make sure that within the genocide space is that the wrong story is not told because
Hmm.
um, I feel like I have an obligation to really not only explain what happened, but to talk about different facets about what happened. I recently went to Chicago to talk about the Namibian genocide, and and I talked about like the women's role in genocide, like what happened to the women in Namibian genocide. And one of the things that occurred in Namibia is that they targeted all the men and left the women alive. And not only did they rape and torture the women, but they were also responsible for doing a lot of the manual like the labor, like pulling, like there's a picture of like Namibian women pulling like a whole
Hmm.
train cart, of supplies, and stuff like that, building buildings and all types of stuff like that. And so like the role of Namibian women and what the struggle that they went through has to be highlighted as well. And so um, these are some of the pieces that I feel good about the work that is finally like breaking through.
Hmm. This is Profound Conversations. We're here with Dr. Lamont Slater, a historian, an academician, an administrator in higher education, and he's talking about the importance of telling the story, not telling the wrong story, but telling the strong story. We know that there were approximately 80,000 Herero that after this particular process from 1904 to 1908, there were about 16,000 left, or about 20,000 Nama, and they're down to 10,000. There were a lot of bodies in this process. And yet the Germans choose to memorialize their fallen. But if we really told the story, there are thousands and thousands of individuals in just that genocide alone that must be memorialized. And it's not the Germans' responsibility to do so. What he's suggesting to us is that it is our obligation and
Mhm.
duty to tell our own story. We must do so without being embarrassed. We see that they name streets after individuals, profile statements are available around individuals who have done horrific things, who've ordered them the murder and the massacre of a population. And yet the population that has the story to tell, the strength of the story, the ones that have been able to resist the oppressor, the ones that have been able to continue to move even after being vilified, even after being traumatized, they continue to exist. If the population is strong enough to withstand the oppressive nature of the Germans and to withstand the Boers, the Dutch, and the Finns, if they are able to withstand that, then that tells you that this is a strong population on the globe. Namibia is just one example. Rwanda shows us something else. And there are many other genocidal acts that we have to be aware of. You mentioned about the genocide and what it means to be a part of a genocidal act. When you have an IQ test that is designed to determine who will be infantry and who will be officers, and this IQ test called the Army Alpha, Army Beta test is racially biased, then you have determined how you're going to sterilize a population, because once it proved that a population, black men were falling on in the lower levels, said this instrument is good, and it was based on that was a group test. It was based on Lewis Terman's test, the Stanford Binet test, which was used part of the human betterment movement, which determined this idea of sterilization acts in this country. Those are two acts of sterilization in this country in the early 1900s that are acts of genocide. We see that this is not something new. We see it as just simply a repeated process. This issue of erasure, this issue of genocide is a common one. Namibia shows us this. Rwanda shows us this. The IQ testing in this country, the sterilization laws in this country have all continued the same narrative. that there's a population deemed to be inferior and one that is deemed to be superior. The problem is that those that have been attacked, aggressed against, either one, don't know the story or afraid to tell the story. And I think that Dr. Slater reminds us that once we know better, we must do better. Dr. Slater, is there anything that you want to close out with this segment of Profound Conversations that we should know, that we should continue to move the mantle and the struggle that you have already engaged us in?
Yeah, I mean, I want to close with this is that I want us to, one of the things I teach in the classes too is that I don't like teaching genocide in a vacuum. Like when people think about genocide, normally think about just a mass killing, but we have to think, we have to expand our view on what genocide is. Genocide also is the transferal of children from the original mother to mothers to families of a different race as well. And so the transferal of children is a part of a genocide. Like even during slavery, like from when a baby was born, it was taken out of the mother's hands and given to somebody else. That's part of a genocide. Or part of genocide also would be creating conditions that will lead to the destruction of a people. Like for example, in Palestine, how you can't, you get supplies into the people. How in Sudan, where people are starving and you can't get any water in there because they're being cut off by the RDF. Like that's part of a genocide as well. And so we have to kind of expand. I want people to understand that genocide comes in different forms. Even a cultural genocide, like forcing people to speak a different language, is a genocide. It's a cultural genocide. Different way of life, different dress. In the case of like the Oshivambo, once the Finnish missionaries came into the region, they told them that your grass skirt was barbaric. You have to wear this traditional dress that we wear in Europe. And even today, you see people Herero wearing that Finnish dress with the horn crown. And so it's part of that cultural genocide that's taken place. And so I just wanted to close out by just letting the public know that genocide comes in all forms, and it's up to us to kind of like identify that and call it. We have to call it when we see it, and that's what I wanted to end on.
That's it. That's all. Profound Conversations. Dr. Slater says, call it out, recognize it, and then rise above it. This is Dr. Mawata Sankara, and we're here on Profound Conversations.
Thank you for joining our Profound Conversation. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to our podcast and then gift this information to a friend or family member using the share button. You can find our show on all social media platforms as well as on our website at profoundconvos.com.